What started out as an ordinary Tuesday would soon become the day I realized how fragile the sense of safety in your own home can be. I left for work that morning with no thought in my mind beyond finishing client reports and maybe picking up takeout on my way home. My husband, James, was away on a business trip, so I expected the house to be quiet when I returned. Instead, I walked into what can only be described as a nightmare. One that wasn't created by strangers, but by the very people who should have respected me most. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something immediately off. A moving truck stood in front of my house, blocking part of the sidewalk, and beside it sat my father's familiar blue sedan. For a split second, I thought maybe I had the wrong house, as if my entire sense of direction had failed me. But as I looked closer, the horrifying reality began to sink in. Boxes were stacked high near the entryway. The front door was propped open with a chair, and voices drifted out from inside. Stepping into my hallway, I was hit with the overwhelming sight of cardboard boxes labeled Vanessa's clothes, baby items, and bedroom stuff. Furniture had been shoved aside, my rug rolled up, and my carefully decorated living room transformed into what looked like a makeshift storage unit. And there she was, Vanessa, my 7 months pregnant sister-in-law, lounging on my couch as though she had always lived there. My father, Walter, stood on a stepladder, hanging blackout curtains over my living room windows like some twisted home improvement project. In that moment, my body froze. My mind couldn't process how something so outrageous could actually be happening. I had entrusted my father with an emergency key for genuine emergencies, a burst pipe, a medical scare, a crisis where access was vital. Never in a million years did I think that trust would be exploited to let someone else move into my home while I was gone. Yet here I was, standing in the ruins of my safe space, violated by a scheme hatched between my own family members. "What is going on here?" I demanded, my voice trembling from the mix of disbelief and anger coursing through me. Vanessa smiled casually, as though this were all perfectly normal, and my father looked down with the self-assurance of a man who believed he was entirely justified. Their words, "family helps family," echoed like poison in the air. In an instant, my home no longer felt like mine. That day marked the beginning of a conflict that would spiral beyond anything I could have imagined. What I discovered in those first minutes was only the surface of a betrayal that cut deeper with every passing hour. And the worst part? It was only the beginning. To understand why this invasion felt like such a profound violation, you have to know what this house meant to me and to James. This wasn't just a roof over our heads or a random rental we stumbled into. This was our dream, something we had built toward for 6 long years, with careful planning, endless sacrifice, and more nights of eating budget meals than I'd care to admit. Every corner of the house was a symbol of our dedication, and every choice, from the paint on the walls to the herbs growing in the backyard, was ours. James and I bought the house just 18 months ago, a craftsman-style home with 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. At 1,500 square feet, it wasn't enormous, but to us, it felt like a palace. The kitchen gleamed with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances we had dreamed of during our apartment years. I had my little garden patch where I grew basil, rosemary, and tomatoes, and James loved to tinker with his grill in the backyard on weekends. It wasn't just a house. It was the place we thought we'd grow old together, the place we'd someday raise children in. Buying it wasn't easy. We had spent years saving, working overtime shifts, and making sacrifices to afford the down payment. I still remember the day we closed. Signing those papers felt like crossing a finish line after a marathon. My father had contributed $5,000 as a gift, which at the time I appreciated deeply. But as James and I often reminded ourselves, the real accomplishment came from the discipline and sweat equity we poured into saving more than $70,000 for that down payment. This was our achievement, our independence. That's why what happened cut so deeply. This wasn't just an intrusion. It was a complete erasure of what the house represented. I had worked for years to earn a safe, private space that belonged to me and my husband, and in a single afternoon, It was treated like community property, open for anyone my father or sister-in-law decided to move in. When I first walked into the living room that day, I noticed how the details of my home, the pieces James and I had carefully chosen, were being overshadowed. My coffee table was shoved against the wall like it didn't matter. My rug, rolled up in the corner, sat ignored. Even the curtains, chosen after hours of shopping to match the earth tones of our decor, had been ripped down to make way for Vanessa's blackout drapes. What I saw wasn't just clutter, it was an invasion of identity. My choices, my style, my sense of ownership, all replaced with someone else's. And maybe the most painful part was that they didn't seem to care. For Vanessa, it was simply convenient. For my father, it was simply what family does. Neither paused to think about what it meant for me, the homeowner whose trust had been trampled. They didn't see my house as something sacred or personal. To them, it was just space that could be repurposed for someone else's crisis. No questions asked, no permission granted. I looked around, and that day, feeling like a stranger in my own home. All the memories we had made, cooking our first Thanksgiving meal together, setting up Christmas decorations, celebrating our wedding anniversary, suddenly felt cheapened. Those moments had been replaced with the suffocating realization that the walls I once thought protected me could so easily be breached by the very people who claimed to love me. In that moment, my home stopped being a sanctuary and became a battleground. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't just about Vanessa needing a place to stay. It was about power, entitlement, and the complete disregard for boundaries. What was once my safe haven had been turned into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The truth is, this incident didn't happen in a vacuum. It wasn't some isolated misunderstanding or one-off lapse in judgment. It was the culmination of years of small, steady intrusions that had worn me down piece by piece. Looking back, the signs were always there, both with Vanessa and with my father, and every time I tried to set boundaries, those boundaries were brushed aside, minimized, or outright ignored. Vanessa, my sister-in-law, had always been a difficult presence in my life. She was 2 years older than me, but she treated her younger brother, James, as though he were still a child in need of her guidance. Every decision we made as a couple seemed to spark her unsolicited opinions. When we mentioned buying a house, she immediately tried to steer us toward neighborhoods closer to her home, even though that would have doubled James's commute time. She framed it as looking out for him, but it always felt like she wanted to keep him tethered to her world, not ours. It wasn't just about opinions. It was her behavior. There was a pattern. Insert herself where she wasn't wanted, create drama when she didn't get her way, then play the victim until everyone bent to accommodate her. I remember one Christmas vividly. Vanessa announced at dinner that she and her husband Brian would be staying at our place for 2 weeks in January. No request, no discussion, just an announcement. When I gently explained that we already had friends coming to visit during part of that time, she burst into tears, accusing me of trying to exclude her from the family. Suddenly, I was the bad guy, and James was stuck in the impossible position of comforting his sister while also defending me. Another time, she borrowed my car without asking. I found out only after she returned it with an empty tank and coffee spilled on the seat. When I confronted her, she laughed it off with the dismissive line, "That's what family is for." It was as if basic respect didn't apply when it came to her. She had her own rules, and those rules always revolved around what was most convenient for her. Then came our wedding. If there was ever a time when boundaries should have been respected, it was then. But Vanessa was relentless. She inserted herself into every detail of planning, from the flower arrangements to the cake flavors. 2 days before the ceremony, she changed our floral order because she thought her choices were better suited. She even went so far as to tell James that my dress was unflattering and tried to convince him to persuade me to choose something else. Thankfully, James shut that down, but the damage was done. Vanessa always assumed her opinion carried more weight than mine, even when it came to my own wedding. And then there was my father, Walter. Since my mother passed away, he had leaned heavily on me emotionally, and in many ways I had tried to be understanding. but his way of staying involved often crossed lines. He had a habit of showing up unannounced, claiming he was just in the neighborhood. Once, while James and I were away on vacation, he decided our chandelier was outdated and replaced it with a fixture of his own choosing. No consultation, no permission. I returned home to find my living room altered by someone else's taste, and when I expressed my frustration, he acted offended, as though I should be grateful. His intrusions weren't just physical. He constantly gave unsolicited financial advice, despite the fact that I work as a financial advisor. He would send me articles with notes like, "You should really consider this instead of what you're doing." And when I reminded him of my qualifications, he dismissed them with, "I've been managing money longer than you've been alive." It was a constant battle between respecting him as my father and demanding that he respect me as an adult. There were times when his overstepping went beyond inconvenience into outright disrespect. I once came home to find him hosting 3 of his friends in our living room, watching football without so much as a text to let me know they were coming. Another time, he invited extended relatives over for dinner and only gave me a 30-minute heads up, saying, "I hope you have enough food." Each time, I told myself I needed to be firmer about boundaries. Each time, he brushed it off as if I were being overly rigid. The truth is, I had been conditioned to accept these boundary violations because pushing back always led to guilt trips. Vanessa weaponized tears, and my father weaponized phrases like, "This is what family does," or, "I just want to be part of your life." And while James often defended me, he also struggled to push back hard against his sister or my father. That left me feeling cornered, outnumbered, and often debating whether my expectations for respect were even reasonable. So when I walked into my house that Tuesday and saw Vanessa's boxes stacked in my hallway, it wasn't a random betrayal. It was the predictable escalation of years of small betrayals, the moment when a pattern of disregard finally crossed the line into outright invasion. It was no longer about late-night football games or meddling in wedding plans. This time, it was about my home, my sanctuary, the one place I thought I had control. And that was the day I realized, if I didn't stand firm now, I might never have control again. If the situation with Vanessa had only been about her strong personality, I might have managed. But everything took a sharp turn the moment her marriage hit turbulence. To this day, I believe her personal crisis was the catalyst that gave her the excuse to bulldoze every remaining boundary James and I had tried to maintain. Vanessa was 7 months pregnant with her first child, a boy she and Brian planned to name Ethan. From the outside, her pregnancy seemed perfectly normal. No complications, no high-risk conditions. But emotionally, she was on a roller coaster, and unfortunately, she decided everyone else had to ride along with her. The first sign of real trouble came in the form of her spending habits. Vanessa had always leaned toward extravagance, but pregnancy seemed to amplify her sense of entitlement. She purchased an entire nursery set from a boutique store for over $3,000, money Brian knew they didn't have. That alone would have been enough to cause tension, but she didn't stop there. Suddenly, the whole house needed redecorating before the baby's arrival. She wanted new curtains, new furniture, fresh paint. When Brian finally checked their accounts, he discovered not just reckless purchases, but a newly opened credit card that Vanessa had secretly maxed out on designer baby clothes. Brian, a soft-spoken accountant, had reached his breaking point. When he confronted her about the $15,000 of debt she had racked up, the argument exploded. James later told me that Brian described it as one of the worst fights of their marriage. Vanessa screamed that he didn't care about her or the baby. She even hurled a vase at the wall in a fit of rage, shouting accusations like, "Do you want our son to have nothing? Do you want him to be the only baby with second-rate things?" Brian, exhausted and cornered, decided he needed space. He told Vanessa he was staying with his college friend Martin for a few days until things calmed down. He packed a bag and left that night, expecting a short separation. That's all it was supposed to be, a pause. But in Vanessa's world, that became the opening act of her dramatic saga. The next morning, James's phone rang non-stop. Vanessa was sobbing, telling him that Brian had abandoned her. She painted a picture of herself as a helpless, heavily pregnant woman left alone with no one to care for her. "What if I fall? What if something happens to the baby?" she kept repeating, ignoring the fact that she lived in a single-story house and had no medical restrictions. James, compassionate to a fault, spent hours reassuring her that Brian hadn't left for good, but Vanessa refused to listen. When James suggested she stay with her parents, Vanessa scoffed. "Mom's too controlling. She'll stress me out even more." When he mentioned her sister, she dismissed it with another excuse. Every alternative, every possible safe place was deemed unacceptable. The only option, in her mind, was us. James tried to handle it delicately. He told her that while we could consider letting her stay, it wasn't his decision alone. He'd need to talk to me first, and that should have been the end of it. A discussion between me and my husband about whether we wanted a long-term house guest. But Vanessa wasn't interested in waiting for permission. Instead, she made a different phone call, to my father. To him, she poured out her story in dramatic detail. A husband who walked out, a pregnancy in crisis, a sister-in-law who didn't want her around, and Walter, always eager to be the rescuer, ate up every word. Without bothering to hear my side, he assured her that she would be taken care of. "Don't worry about Olivia," he told her. "I have an emergency key. Family doesn't need permission to help family." In that moment, the conspiracy was born. Vanessa's dramatics and Walter's savior complex combined into the perfect storm, a plan to move her into my home behind my back. They didn't pause to consider what it would do to me or my marriage. They didn't ask if it was reasonable. They only thought about what Vanessa wanted, and in their minds, what she wanted was all that mattered. While I was busy at work, oblivious to the storm brewing at home, Vanessa and my father were plotting behind my back. What still stuns me to this day is how deliberate it all was. This wasn't an impulsive decision made in the heat of the moment. It was a calculated plan to bypass me entirely, carried out under the belief that their version of family loyalty justified anything. From what I later pieced together, it all started the morning after Brian left. Vanessa, desperate to solidify her position, called Walter with her carefully crafted tale of abandonment. She told him James had already agreed she could move in, but that I was being difficult. In her retelling, I wasn't just hesitant. I was painted as cold and unfeeling, the villain standing in the way of her safety. Walter, ever eager to be the hero, didn't ask questions. He didn't call me to confirm. He didn't even consider that there might be another side to the story. To him, Vanessa's word was enough. And so, he promised. To her action. "Don't you worry about Olivia," he assured her. "I have an emergency key. We don't need to wait for her permission. Family takes care of family." With those words, a new reality was set in motion. One where my voice, my consent, and even my ownership of my home no longer mattered. Together, they arranged the move with precision. Walter scheduled it for the exact day James would be out of town on a 2-day business trip, knowing his absence would make things easier. Vanessa began packing only her essentials. But as I would later discover, her definition of essentials included far more than a suitcase. She wanted her clothes, her baby items, and even furniture brought into my living room. Walter, with his car and the rented moving truck, was all too happy to make it happen. By the time Mrs. Peterson, our observant elderly neighbor, called me at work to tell me about the moving truck in my driveway, they had already been unloading for over an hour. My father didn't see himself as intruding. He saw himself as rescuing. And Vanessa, well, she saw herself as entitled. Entitled to my home, my space, my kitchen, my living room, and my peace of mind. What still burns me is how neither of them considered the alternatives. Vanessa had countless friends, a sister with a spacious 4-bedroom home, and of course her own husband, who had never intended to stay away more than a couple of nights. But none of those options gave her the drama, the leverage, or the control she seemed to crave. Moving into my home wasn't about safety. It was about forcing her presence into the center of my life. And Walter, blinded by his desire to play savior, was her perfect accomplice. The betrayal ran deeper because of the trust they violated. That emergency key had been given to my father in good faith, a symbol of trust and security. It was meant for emergencies. If I locked myself out, if a pipe burst, if something unexpected happened while James and I were away. Instead, it became the tool he used to undermine me, to open the door to an invasion I had never consented to. Later, when I confronted him, Walter insisted he was acting out of love. But love doesn't sneak around in moving trucks. Love doesn't rearrange someone's living room in your absence. And love doesn't hand over your sanctuary to someone else without even asking you first. What he and Vanessa had really acted out of was entitlement. She felt entitled to my home, and he felt entitled to override me because he was my father. As I would soon learn, this conspiracy wasn't just about moving Vanessa in temporarily. No, it was about establishing her in my home for months, until after the baby was born, if she got her way. And the scariest part? By the time I walked through that front door and saw the chaos, it was already too late. They had executed their plan with complete confidence, certain that my objections wouldn't matter. The moment I stepped through the door that Tuesday afternoon is seared into my memory with perfect clarity. It was one of those experiences where time slows down and every detail imprints itself so deeply that you know you'll never forget it. My heart was pounding from the neighbor's call about a moving truck, but even then I couldn't have imagined just how bad it would be until I saw it with my own eyes. The first thing that hit me was the smell of cardboard and dust. My hallway, usually neat and uncluttered, had become a narrow path between towering stacks of boxes labeled in Vanessa's handwriting, baby items, nursery supplies, clothes, and even oaths. That read kitchen stuff. It wasn't just a bag or two, it was half her house transplanted into mine. As I stepped further inside, I felt my stomach turn. My once cozy living room was unrecognizable. The coffee table James and I had picked out on a special anniversary trip was shoved against the wall like it was junk. My rug, the one I had carefully chosen to match the warm tones of our decor, was rolled up in the corner. The seating area where we had spent so many evenings together had been dismantled. In its place stood a fold-out sofa bed stretched across the center of the room, pillows and sheets already laid out as if she'd been there for weeks, not hours. And then I saw them, the intruders. Vanessa, round with pregnancy, lounged comfortably on my couch, scrolling through her phone as though she owned the place. My father was halfway up a stepladder, hanging blackout curtains over my windows. He looked so at home, so certain of his right to be there, that for a moment I questioned if I was the one out of place. The shock left me frozen for a second, but anger quickly took over. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice shaking. Both of them turned at the sound, startled that I had arrived earlier than expected. Vanessa, ever quick to recover, plastered on a casual smile. "Oh, Olivia, you're home early. Walter's helping me get settled in. I hope you don't mind that we moved the coffee table. I need space for the sofa bed until the baby comes." Her words hit me like a punch. Until the baby comes. That was 2 months away at least. My father climbed down from the ladder, his face set in a mask of self-righteousness. "Now, Olivia, don't overreact. Vanessa is family and she needs our help right now. Brian has left her, and she can't be alone in her condition." I stared at them, utterly floored by the audacity. "Brian didn't leave her," I shot back, remembering James's explanation. "They had an argument. He's staying with a friend for a couple of days. That doesn't give you the right to move her into my house without asking me." That was when Vanessa's eyes welled up with tears, her favorite weapon. "I knew you'd be like this," she whispered dramatically. "James said it would be fine for me to stay here. I have nowhere else to go, and I'm 7 months pregnant. Olivia, do you want me to be homeless?" My blood boiled. She wasn't homeless. She had parents, a sister, friends, even Brian if she wanted to reconcile. This wasn't desperation, it was manipulation. I turned to my father, the greater betrayal in my eyes. "Dad, how could you use your emergency key like this? That key was for emergencies, not for moving people into my house behind my back." He folded his arms, posture stiff with indignation. "This is an emergency, Olivia. Vanessa needs help, and this is what family does. I'm disappointed in you for being so selfish." Selfish. The word cut like a blade. Here I was, standing in the home I had worked years to afford, watching my personal space get rearranged without my consent, and somehow I was the selfish one. Vanessa leaned back, hand on her belly as though the drama might send her into labor. "Please stop shouting. It's not good for the baby. I can't believe you're making such a big deal about helping family in need." I looked around at the chaos, the violation, the blatant disregard for my boundaries, and realized something chilling. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't temporary. They had no intention of leaving. Vanessa and my father believed they had the right to override me, and they weren't even pretending otherwise. My voice dropped, low and steady. "Both of you need to leave. Now. Vanessa, call Brian. Your sister, anyone. But you cannot stay here. Dad, I want my emergency key back immediately." Their refusal came swiftly, almost rehearsed. Vanessa shook her head defiantly. "I'm not going anywhere. James said I could stay, and I'm not giving back the key." My father added firmly, "Not when you're being this irrational. You'll thank me later when you calm down." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just my house anymore. They had decided, without me, that it was theirs too. My sanctuary had been hijacked, and unless I fought back, I was about to lose more than just my living room. When James finally called me back that afternoon after his big presentation in Chicago, I was vibrating with rage. I had spent hours confined to our bedroom, listening to Vanessa shuffle boxes and my father hammer things into walls as if they were building a new life right on top of mine. Every sound, the squeak of tape, the thud of furniture, the scrape of chairs, felt like an invasion of my sanity. The moment James's voice came through the phone, I unloaded everything. The moving truck, the boxes stacked in the hallway, the sofa bed blocking our living room, and my father smugly defending his actions as if he were the rightful co-owner of our home. "They did what?" James exclaimed, his shock genuine. "I told Vanessa we'd have to talk about it first. I never said she could just move in like that." "Well, she's here now," I snapped bitterly. "And she's unpacking enough stuff to last months. Apparently your sister and my father have decided they get to make the rules about our house while we're away." There was a long silence, then a heavy sigh. "I'll be home tomorrow night. Just try to keep things civil until then, okay? We'll sort it out when I get back." My chest tightened with disappointment. I had hoped for fire, for outrage, for a clear declaration that he was on my side and that Vanessa and my father needed to leave immediately. Instead, what I got was patience. That infuriating, placating tone James sometimes used when he didn't want to confront someone. "So, I'm just supposed to live like this for the next 24 hours? I asked, incredulous. "I'm supposed to accept that my house has been hijacked while you wait it out?" "It's just one day, Olivia," he said gently. "Vanessa is pregnant and emotional right now. Let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be." Those words cut deeper than he realized. Dramatic. That's what he thought this was. As though the destruction of our privacy, the disrespect of our boundaries, the betrayal of my father's trust were nothing more than petty family squabbling. I ended the call soon after, my frustration spilling into a kind of hollow exhaustion. I had never felt more alone in my own marriage. When James finally arrived home the next evening, I could see the shock on his face as soon as he walked through the door. He had expected a suitcase, maybe two, not a full-scale relocation. Vanessa had taken over the bathroom closest to the living room, spreading her creams, vitamins, and toiletries across the counter. Our kitchen cabinets had been rearranged to make room for her pregnancy teas and snacks, and my father had made multiple trips back and forth, carting in more belongings. James ran a hand through his hair, his voice low. "This is way more than I thought." I pulled him into our bedroom for a private conversation, desperate for solidarity. "She's not staying, James. This isn't temporary. She's already planning a nursery in our living room. And Dad, he changed our locks without telling me." James sat on the edge of the bed, his face torn between conflict and fatigue. Now, but she's my sister. She's pregnant. I can't just throw her out on the street. No one's talking about the street, I countered sharply. She has options, plenty of them. Parents, sister, friends, even Brian. This isn't about need. It's about entitlement. He looked at me, pained. Could we maybe just let her stay for a few days? A week at most? Until things cool down? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything, after the invasion, after the lies, after the lock change, my husband was still negotiating with my boundaries. So you're taking her side? I asked, my voice trembling. I'm not taking sides, he insisted weakly. I'm trying to find a solution that works for everyone. But in that moment, it didn't feel like he was trying to work for us. It felt like he was working for her, again. And as much as I loved him, as much as I wanted to believe he would stand firmly with me, the truth was undeniable. James's weak stand had left me stranded in my own home, surrounded by people who thought my voice didn't matter. If I thought the invasion had reached its peak when I found Vanessa sprawled on my couch and my father hanging curtains, I was wrong. What followed in the next 48 hours pushed things into darker, more unsettling territory. The longer they stayed, the more brazen they became. It wasn't just about boxes or furniture anymore. It was about control over my home, my choices, even my sense of safety. The first major escalation happened the morning after James came back. I woke up to the sound of laughter in the kitchen. At first, I thought maybe James was up early, trying to make peace by sharing breakfast with Vanessa. But when I walked out, still half asleep in my robe, I froze. Vanessa was sitting at my kitchen island with her friend Pamela, sipping tea from my best china, the set I reserved for special occasions. Pancakes and fruit spread across my counters in a sticky mess, as though my kitchen were her personal diner. "Oh, good morning," Vanessa chirped, all smiles. "I hope we didn't wake you. Pamela came over to help me organize my things. I made enough breakfast for everyone." My jaw clenched. "Vanessa, you can't just invite people over without asking. This is not your house." Pamela looked caught in the middle, glancing at Vanessa with discomfort. But Vanessa only rolled her eyes. "We'll stay out of your way. Pamela's helping me set up the nursery corner in the living room." Nursery corner. Those words made my stomach drop. She wasn't thinking in terms of days. She was planning for months. She had no intention of leaving, and she was making that clear with every move. If that wasn't enough, my father arrived shortly after, carrying yet another box. He brushed past me without so much as a greeting, heading straight for the living room where Vanessa and Pamela were debating the placement of her rocking chair. I followed him into the hallway, seething. "Dad, we need to talk, now!" He reluctantly stopped, his expression already defensive. "I want my emergency key back," I said firmly. "You abused the trust we gave you. That key was for emergencies, not for this." His response chilled me. "I'm not giving it back. Not when you're being so unreasonable about helping family. The key stays with me in case Vanessa needs something while you and James are at work." It took me a moment to process his words. Not only was he refusing to return the key, but he was also openly declaring that he intended to use it whenever he decided it was necessary. My own father was positioning himself as gatekeeper of my home, as if I were a tenant instead of the homeowner. "This isn't about being selfish," I shot back. "This is about respect. You don't get to move someone into my house without my consent. You don't get to change the rules of my home." But he only shook his head, his tone condescending. You don't understand what family means. When I was growing up, we helped each other without all these selfish conditions you're so obsessed with. You've been poisoned by modern thinking. Family comes first." Before I could respond, Vanessa waddled over, hand on her belly like a prop in her performance. "Why are you shouting at Walter?" she demanded. "He's been nothing but helpful. Unlike some people, he actually cares about me and the baby." Her words dripped with accusation, her voice rising theatrically. "What kind of person refuses to help their pregnant sister-in-law? Brian abandoned me, and you'd rather throw me out than let me stay somewhere safe. The lies piled up so high I felt buried under them. Brian hadn't abandoned her. She wasn't unsafe. And yet, in their version of reality, I was the villain, the cold, selfish woman more concerned with her privacy than with the well-being of a baby. The final straw came later that evening. I went to grab something from my office and discovered a handwritten list sitting on my desk. Baby registry items to order. Nursery at Olivia's house. She wasn't just staying. She was planning a full nursery. In my living room. My hands shook as I held the paper, the words blurring from the sheer disbelief of it all. But the worst discovery came when I tried to unlock the back door to let the dog out. My key didn't work. Panic surged through me. I tried again, jiggling the lock, but it was clear. The lock had been changed. My father had replaced it without telling me, without giving me a new key. My own home, the one place in the world that should have been my sanctuary, was no longer fully accessible to me. When I confronted him, his response was casual, almost smug. I upgraded your security. You'll get the new key when you start being reasonable about Vanessa staying. That was the moment something inside me snapped. This wasn't just about a house guest anymore. This wasn't even about family conflict. This was about control. My father and Vanessa had turned my home into their battleground, and they were winning. They were making the rules. They were dictating my life. And standing in the middle of it all was James. Silent, hesitant, caught between his sister and his wife. The longer he wavered, the more power they took. And the more I realized, if I didn't act soon, I was going to lose not just my home, but my sense of self. By the third day, I had reached my limit. The boxes, the rearranged furniture, the constant presence of Vanessa and my father, it all felt like a weight pressing on my chest, suffocating me in my own home. Every corner of the house screamed of their intrusion. The nursery list on my desk, Vanessa's lotions and vitamins covering the bathroom counter, my kitchen cabinets reorganized for her teas and snacks, and the back door locked against me with a key I didn't have. I remember standing in the hallway, staring at the fold-out sofa that had become a permanent fixture in my living room, and thinking, if I don't act now, this will never end. Vanessa wasn't here for a few days. She wasn't here for a week. She was embedding herself into my life for months, maybe longer, and my father was enabling every step of it. I tried one last time to reason with them. Vanessa, you have 24 hours to find somewhere else to stay. Dad, I want my key back. This is non-negotiable. Their responses were immediate, unified, and infuriating. Vanessa clutched her belly, her face contorted into a mask of indignation. You can't kick out a pregnant woman. James would never allow it. You're heartless. My father's expression hardened. This is ridiculous. Vanessa is family. She's staying, and if I have to, I'll stay too, to make Sue... Or you don't bully her. You'll regret this selfishness. Selfish, that word again. It echoed in my head like a curse. I wasn't selfish. I was desperate. I was fighting for the basic right to feel safe and respected in my own home. Yet somehow, in their narrative, I was the villain. The cruel daughter, the cold sister-in-law, the woman who cared more about her privacy than her family. That night, James and I argued behind closed doors until our voices were hoarse. I laid out every violation, every manipulation, every lock and curtain and box piled in our once cozy home. He admitted it had gone too far, but even then he hesitated. He still spoke in maybes and compromises, suggesting Vanessa could stay just a few more days. James, I said, my voice breaking. She's not leaving. She's setting up a nursery. Dad changed the locks. They're not guests. They've taken over. He rubbed his face, exhausted, torn. What choice do we have? I can't physically drag my pregnant sister out. I don't know what to do. That was the moment I realized. I couldn't rely on James to fix this. He was too caught between loyalty and guilt, too afraid of being the brother who abandoned his sister. And my father? He wasn't going to stop until I bent to his will. So the choice became mine. Alone, I had to decide whether I would keep tolerating this, slowly suffocating in my own home, or whether I would take action. The The decision crystallized in a single, quiet moment. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, the house buzzing with voices I didn't want to hear, when it hit me. This wasn't a family disagreement anymore. This was trespassing. This was a violation of property and autonomy. And if they refused to respect my boundaries, then I had one option left, an option I never thought I'd use against my own father and sister-in-law. The next morning, with shaking hands, I picked up my phone, not to call James, not to plead with Vanessa, not to argue with Walter again. I dialed the non-emergency police line. My voice wavered as I explained the situation. My father used an emergency key to move my sister-in-law into my home without permission. I've asked them to leave repeatedly. They refuse. He even changed one of my locks. The officer asked a few questions. Was my name on the deed? Had I clearly told them they couldn't stay? Did I feel unsafe? I answered yes to all but the last, and then came the words that both terrified and relieved me. We can send officers to assist with removing unwanted occupants. Would you like us to do that? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. Yes, I said. Please. In that moment, I knew there was no going back. The hours between my call to the non-emergency line and the officer's arrival were some of the longest of my life. My hands shook as I waited, pacing my bedroom like a caged animal. I didn't tell James what I'd done. I knew if I did, he would try to stop me. Not because he thought I was wrong, but because he was too torn between me and Vanessa to support anything decisive. This was a decision I had to make alone, for my own sanity and the future of my home. At 3:30 that afternoon, 2 uniformed officers arrived. I met them outside, my proof of ownership in hand, my voice trembling as I explained the situation once more. They listened calmly, then nodded. We'll go inside with you. If they refuse to leave, we'll treat it as trespassing. My pulse thundered in my ears as we walked up the driveway. Inside, the scene was as surreal as ever. Vanessa was napping on the fold-out sofa, her swollen belly rising and falling beneath an oversized t-shirt. My father was in the kitchen, humming to himself as he prepared a sandwich from my groceries, as if nothing in the world were wrong. The moment they saw the officers behind me, everything shattered. "What's going on?" my father demanded, his sandwich half-made, his face flushing red. "Sir," one officer said evenly, "the homeowners have reported that you and this woman are occupying the property without permission. They've asked you to leave, and you've refused. Is that correct?" "This is ridiculous," my father sputtered. "I'm her father, and that's her pregnant sister-in-law. Family doesn't need permission." "Family relationships don't override property rights," the officer replied firmly. "If the homeowners say you're not allowed to stay, you must leave. Otherwise, you're trespassing." By then, Vanessa had sat up, clutching her belly theatrically. Her eyes widened in mock horror. "She can't kick me out. I'm 7 months pregnant. James said I could stay here." The second officer turned to me. "Is James your husband?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "But his name is on the deed with mine, and he did not consent to her moving in like this." My father stepped forward, anger radiating off him. "This is between me and my daughter. You have no right to interfere in a family matter." "Actually, sir, we do when the law is being broken," the officer shot back. "We're giving you the opportunity to leave voluntarily. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to place you under arrest for trespassing." My father's face twisted with outrage. "Arrest? You'd arrest a 64-year-old man for helping his pregnant daughter-in-law? Go ahead. The media will love this story." What happened next felt like a scene from a nightmare. My father, ignoring every warning, put his hand on one officer's arm in a gesture of defiance. That was the breaking point. In seconds, they had him in handcuffs. "Walter Sanders, you are under arrest for trespassing and resisting an officer," the policeman declared. "You have the right to remain silent." As the words of the Miranda warning echoed through the house, Vanessa's scream pierced the air. "You're killing my baby with stress," she wailed, one hand on her belly. "How could you do this to your own father, Olivia? To your nephew?" The second officer turned to her calmly. "Ma'am, do you need medical attention? Should we call an ambulance?" Her tears stopped almost instantly. "No," she snapped. I just need you to stop arresting Walter and leave us alone. Then you need to gather your belongings and leave the premises as well, the officer replied. You can return for the rest of your things at a later time with the homeowner's agreement. Vanessa's face hardened, her voice dripping with venom. James will hear about this. Everyone will hear how you had your own father arrested and threw your pregnant sister-in-law out onto the street. I met her glare with a steady one of my own. You had options, Vanessa. You chose this. This was never about safety. It was about control. Minutes later, my father was escorted to the police car, shouting over his shoulder, "You'll regret this, Olivia. This is not what family does." Vanessa, still fuming, shoved a few essentials into her purse and stormed out, vowing revenge through family gossip. The door shut behind them, and for the first time in days, silence filled my house. My hands were still shaking, adrenaline coursing through me, but a deep sense of relief washed over me. The battle had reached its climax. The invasion was over, at least for now. I sank onto the sofa, staring at the space where my life had been hijacked, knowing that what had just happened would change everything. Not just my relationship with Vanessa, not just with my father, but with my entire family. If I thought the hardest part was over after watching police escort my father out of my house and forcing Vanessa to leave, I was wrong. The silence, too. Had followed their exit was only temporary. Within hours, the real storm began, and this time, it wasn't inside my home, but across my entire family. My phone lit up with calls and messages the moment word got out. Relatives, cousins, aunts, even distant family members I barely spoke to, all reaching out with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. The story being spread was simple, dramatic, and one-sided. I had my elderly father arrested and threw my pregnant sister-in-law onto the street. No one mentioned the moving truck, the lock change, the boxes stacked high in my hallway, or the fact that I had asked them repeatedly to leave. Those details disappeared. What remained was a villain narrative starring me. James's parents were among the angriest. His mother called in tears, her voice sharp with accusation. "How could you do that to Vanessa? She's carrying your nephew. Family helps family, Olivia. What kind of person would call the police on their own father?" I tried to explain, tried to remind her that her daughter had options, that she hadn't been abandoned, that this was about boundaries, not cruelty. But nothing I said mattered. In their eyes, I had crossed an unforgivable line. Even Brian, who had left Vanessa after their explosive argument, phoned me in anger. "Do you realize the stress you've put on her? She's pregnant, Olivia. Pregnant. You should have been more compassionate." His words stung, though later he admitted he hadn't known the full story. But at the time, it only added to the feeling that everyone had turned against me. The guilt pressed down on me in waves. I replayed the sight of my father in handcuffs over and over, wondering if I had gone too far. I never wanted to be the kind of daughter who called the police on her own parent. I never wanted to be painted as the heartless woman who threw out a vulnerable family member. Yet I couldn't shake the truth. I had asked, I had begged, I had set boundaries, and they refused. What else was I supposed to do? James, to his credit, came home early from work that night. We sat on the couch in the living room that still bore the ghostly traces of Vanessa's takeover. Indentations where boxes had sat, curtain rods slightly bent from hasty installations. His face was weary, his voice heavy with the weight of divided loyalties. "I wish you had called me first," he said quietly. "I would have tried to help." "I couldn't," I admitted, my throat tight. "You weren't going to act. You kept waiting, hoping they'd come to their senses. But they weren't going to, James. They changed our locks. They were setting up a nursery. This wasn't going to end unless someone ended it." He was silent for a long time, then finally nodded. "You're right. I wanted to protect everyone, but in trying to do that, I failed to protect you. I failed to protect us." His words offered some comfort, but they didn't erase the reality. Our relationships with both sides of our families had taken a massive hit. His parents were furious. My father refused to speak to me directly, sending only a cold text. "I hope you're satisfied. This is not the daughter I raised. And Vanessa? She turned her experience into a dramatic saga, telling anyone who would listen that I had threatened her, stressed her pregnancy, and humiliated her in front of the entire family. The backlash was brutal, isolating. For days, I felt like James and I were standing alone against a tidal wave of anger and judgment. The emotional toll was enormous, not just on me, but on our marriage. James, while supportive in private, still bore the burden of his family's anger, and I carried the weight of my father's disappointment. The invasion had ended, but the fallout was just beginning. And as much as it hurt, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. If I hadn't acted, I wouldn't have a marriage or a home left to fight for. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. The backlash didn't fade overnight. My phone buzzed constantly with relatives calling to guilt me, shame me, or demand explanations. Friends who had once admired my independence seemed unsure of what to say now that I was painted as the woman who had kicked out her pregnant sister-in-law. And my father? He cut me off completely, telling anyone who would listen that I was ungrateful, selfish, and cruel. The weight of it all pressed down on me. At night, when the house was quiet again, I would sit on the couch, the same couch Vanessa had claimed as her throne, and cry. For days, I questioned myself. Had I gone too far? Should I have tried one more conversation? One more compromise? Was I really the villain they said I was? It was during one of those lonely nights that I realized I needed help. Not from James, not from family, but from someone who could help me sort through the chaos in my head. I found a therapist, Dr. Maxwell, who specialized in family dynamics. She listened patiently as I poured out the entire story, every detail from the moving truck to the police intervention. Then she looked me in the eye and said something that changed everything. What your father and sister-in-law did wasn't just inconsiderate. It was manipulative. It was a form of emotional abuse. They used guilt, fear, and even physical control of your space to override your boundaries. You responded after exhausting every other option. That's not cruelty. That's survival. For the first time since it happened, I felt validated. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't selfish. I was a woman defending her home and her marriage from people who refused to respect her. With therapy, I began to understand the patterns that had led me here. Years of letting small boundary violations slide. Years of being guilted into silence. This wasn't just about Vanessa moving in. It was about me finally drawing a line and refusing to let anyone step over it again. Meanwhile, my marriage went through its own test. James and I had long, difficult conversations about what had happened and what it meant for our future. He admitted that he had been too afraid to take a stand against his sister, too eager to keep the peace at the cost of our well-being. I was trying to be a good brother, he confessed one night, but in the process, I was being a bad husband. I'm sorry, Olivia. That was the turning point for us. We rebuilt slowly, piece by piece. We changed all the locks and installed a security system. We set strict rules. No family members would have keys to our home again, and any request to stay with us would require full agreement from both of us. For the first time, I felt like James and I were united, truly partners protecting the life we had built together. It took months for the dust to settle. Vanessa gave birth to her baby boy, Ethan, and while James went to the hospital to meet his nephew, I stayed home. I knew my presence would only fuel the drama. Later, when I finally met Ethan at his christening, Vanessa was polite but distant. We were never going to be close, but at least we had established clear boundaries. My father was harder. It took 6 months before he would even meet with me, and even then, it was at a neutral coffee shop with my aunt as mediator. He sat across from me, his face stiff, and said flatly, "I didn't come to apologize. What you did was unforgivable." I took a deep breath and answered calmly, "I'm not asking for an apology. I'm asking for a way forward. But you need to understand, Wani. What you did was a betrayal. You made decisions about my home without me. You took away my security in the one place I should feel safest. That isn't love. That's control." For the first time, his expression cracked. "I never meant to make you feel unsafe. he admitted slowly. "I thought you were just being stubborn." We didn't resolve everything that day, but eventually, months later, he handed me back the original emergency key he had held onto even after the lock changes. "I still believe families should help each other," he said quietly, "but I understand now that help should be offered, not forced." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was enough. I accepted it for what it was, the closest thing to an apology I was ever going to get. Through it all, the most profound change wasn't in Vanessa or in my father. It was in me. I learned that protecting my boundaries doesn't make me selfish. It makes me strong. I learned that family love without respect isn't really love at all. And most importantly, I learned that my peace, my safety, and my autonomy are worth fighting for, no matter who stands against them. A year later, I can finally look back at that day without shaking. It was one of the most painful experiences of my life, but it taught me lessons I'll carry forever. My home is my sanctuary, and no one, not even family, has the right to take that away from me. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in the face of family pressure? Have you ever been called selfish for protecting your boundaries? I want to hear your stories. Share them in the comments below because no one should feel alone in experiences like this. If you've ever had to draw a hard line with loved ones, hit that like button so others know they're not alone. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about navigating complicated family dynamics, betrayal, and the strength it takes to protect yourself. Remember this: loving your family doesn't mean letting them walk all over you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no, and mean it.